So you're sitting at your first tribal council, Jeff is reading out the votes, everything looks like it's going fine, but then all of a sudden, the votes tie. Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. What do we do now? Well, I'm here to tell you what happens at a tie vote and make sure that you're not going to be as confused as Wu was on his season.
Then if it goes to another tie, then man, we're gonna have to draw rocks? The jury? We fight for it? I don't know.
So today we're going to take a look at all the tie vote rules, and I can guarantee you that whether you're a newbie to the show or a Survivor Superfan, you're going to learn something new today. The first ever tie in Survivor would not come to be until the final four of the first season, Survivor Borneo, where Richard and Sue Hawk both received 2 votes.
Our first tie.
This is where the first rule for the tie vote comes into play, where Jeff informs us that there will be a revote, where the 2 people who did not receive the votes would go back and vote again. This rule makes sure that everyone voting will now be making a decision on one of the people in a tie in the case they voted somewhere else. It also allows people to reconsider who they voted for. And in this case, Kelly decides, yeah, you know what? I don't actually want Rich to go home. I'm going to vote out Sue. And Sue goes home and she doesn't really like it. This rule is all and good, but what happens if the vote stays tied and becomes deadlocked? To answer this, we're going to have to go to the next season, Survivor Australia. It was in Survivor's sophomore season where we found out that the rule for a tie vote that gets deadlocked is that whoever in the tie has the most amount of votes against them previous to this vote is the one that gets sent home. The first time we would see this would be in a vote between Keith and Mitchell, where Mitchell had more votes earlier, so he went home.
How many votes have you had cast against you, Keith?
None.
Mitchell?
1.
1. 1 vote is the difference. I need you to bring me your torch.
The most notable time, though, in this season was at the merge. Unlike the previous season where alliances were hated, in Australia, alliances were defined by the tribes you started out on. So when both tribes go to the merge with 5 people, a deadlock seemed imminent. This caused the start of the merge to become an information game, where the people tried to figure out who had votes on the other tribe. The Ogahor tribe would win out, though, because Kimmy let it slip in a previous challenge that Jeff Varner had a previous vote, while the Kucha tribe voted for Colby, and Colby didn't receive any votes pre-merge. This rule's not perfect, but it would remain in effect for the next season, where it really showed its cracks. You may have already thought of one potential issue with this new tie vote rule. Well, other than the tiebreaker being pretty arbitrary. The issue being that because it's based on previous votes, that tiebreaker can also tie. And that's exactly what happened in the 3rd episode of Survivor Africa, where the Samburu tribe went to their first tribal council and they were deadlocked right off the bat, which meant they had to figure out some sort of other tiebreaker. And this tiebreaker would be one to knock your socks off. They participated in a survival trivia competition.
Correct answer is C, worm infestation.
You missed that one.
This might have been the lamest way to break a tie because it was pretty arbitrary and out of nowhere. This is something that would never happen in the modern version of the show, as it has transitioned to being mostly about the game aspect of it. But back then, the new locations and surviving there was a huge part of it, so it made it not feel as out of place as it would now. So the contestants were asked a series of questions from the survival guide they were given as preparation for the season. And Lindsay happened to know more of them than Carl, so she stayed. Following Africa, it became apparent to the producers that the tie vote rules that they had were not good. The producers decided that they wanted the decision of who to go home to be in the hands of the players that were currently in the game, and wanted to make it feel as fair as possible and de-incentivize the amount of times that votes got deadlocked. As no matter what the tiebreaker rule was, it would feel unfair in some way to whoever goes home. The revote would remain intact. However, after the revote, if it was deadlocked, it would move into a deliberation period, where if all of the people who were in the revote came to a consensus on sending one of the people home, that person would be eliminated. If not, well, that would be the worst case scenario. The contestants would find out about this in the final 4 of Marquesas, where the votes became deadlocked between Kathy and Neela. Vecepia and Pascal would disagree on who they wanted to stay in the game, however, which should lead to the vote going to Rocks. So, Kathy, Neela, and Pascal put their hands in the bag, and unfortunately for Pascal, he drew the purple rock and got sent home.
1, reveal.
No!
felt purple.
This may seem like a really crappy way to get sent home, and that's because it is. The producers wanted to make sure that the contestants would do everything that they could to avoid going to rocks. This would be so successful that in the next 5 seasons, there wouldn't be a single tie vote, which is the longest stretch in Survivor history. The next season that would have a tie vote, however, would make up for this in droves. Where the first 9 seasons had a combined total of 6 tie votes, Survivor Palau had 4, and from this point on in the show, it would become more common than not for a season to have a tie vote. This is in part due to one of the changes that was made in this season. This change would first be introduced when the Oolong tribe, consisting of only Stephanie and Bobby John, lost yet another immunity challenge. Due to there only being 2 of them and no advantages such as idols or extra votes existing at this point, their 2 votes canceled each other out, and thus they would have to participate in a tiebreaker challenge. Instead of making them draw rocks, the producers had them compete in a fire-making challenge, where Stephanie would prevail, sending Bobby John home. This change was then carried into the Final Four, where instead of making the 2 people in a tie draw rocks, they instead had them compete in a fire-making challenge without any deliberation period. While it would seem like the rock draw is gone entirely, that's not actually the case. Instead of having everyone draw rocks that isn't immune, they made it so that the people that receive the votes become immune if it goes to a rock draw. This was made to further de-incentivize people going to a rock draw. So in this case, this would mean because Tom had immunity, he would be able to tell Katie, hey, you better agree with me on this vote, or you're going home because you're drawing rocks here. The producers did not want to give the person who won immunity at the Final Four this much power, so when they changed the tie vote rule, they decided that it would be more fair to do the fire-making challenge. It is unknown when they decided to make this change, as we didn't see a tie for 5 seasons straight, but since Paschal went home as not being one of the people that was actually voted for in the Final Four, it was likely seen as unfair, so they decided to change the rule because of that. Due to these rule changes, we wouldn't see another rock draw happen until season 27, Blood vs. Water, where at the final 6 the cast went to rocks, and 3 people drew rocks. This is because people were so afraid of the random chance element of a rock draw that people wanted to avoid ties getting deadlocked at all costs. It wasn't until this season where a rock draw could be seen as something that is a strategic move that someone might want to make depending on their game situation.
Katie, want a hug? Dangerous move. Ballsy. Didn't think you had the balls to do that. That's your chair over there, one of those.
This doesn't mean that rock draws would become more common. In fact, they only happen one more time after that. But there's something that people actually talk about nowadays as an option to do because it seemed more as a statement of what you're willing to go to in the game. The fire-making twist returned 2 seasons later in Survivor Panama. This time, however, they skipped the revote and went straight to fire-making. This was especially odd because in Marquesas, when they drew rocks, there was no revote. So this was something that they added back, but then took away forever. The revote remains a part of the rules outside of the Final Four, and other than in Survivor Game Changers, where the producers decided they were going to get rid of it for 1 season, but that didn't last at all. This does not mean, however, that these are all of the rules for a tiebreaker, as we would find out a lot of new rules when advantages were introduced into the game. These advantages caused many interesting things, so we're going to look at them now. The first and most prominent advantage that affects votes is the hidden immunity idol. One idol alone, without any other advantages, wouldn't do much in terms of affecting a tie vote. The only scenario where it could do much would be at a pre-merge 4-person tribal council, which doesn't happen very often. In that scenario, though, the likely outcome of someone using an idol, not receiving any of the votes, and then there also being a tie that deadlocks, would be the exact scenario that they tried to get rid of in the actual Final Four, where whoever had immunity would basically be able to dictate who got voted out. If we haven't seen one idol mess with the format, though, what about 2 idols? Well, this is where Survivor Cambodia's second chance comes into play. At the final 6, Kelly Wentworth was public enemy number 1, but she was able to convince Kimmy and Keith to vote with her against Jeremy. This meant that the votes would be split 3-3 on Jeremy and Kelly. Kelly didn't want to risk her game on that though, so she decided to play her hidden immunity idol to make sure that she wouldn't go home and likely Jeremy would. Well, at least that would be what happens if Jeremy didn't also play his hidden immunity idol. So, when the votes were read, every single vote got negated by one of these two idols, which meant that they had to do another revote.
Jeremy. Will not count.
What the hell?
No, this is the first. All right, for the first time in 31 seasons, we have no votes cast for anybody at Tribal Council.
This revote resulted in another tie between Kimmy and Tasha. Jeff, then in a really odd move, just had the contestants verbally say whether or not they wanted to change their vote. Obviously, no one said that they wanted to change their vote verbally. I don't know why he thought that would happen. But Jeff considered this to be good enough as a revote, so they went right into the deliberation period after this. This created a really odd scenario where if they don't all agree on who to vote for, Keith actually goes home because Kimmy and Tasha would become immune, and Jeremy and Kelly were immune because of their hidden immunity idols, and Spencer had immunity from the challenge. So he kind of found a loophole to vote himself out, and he almost took it because he felt bad for Kimmy. But upon reflection and talking to the rest of the cast, he decided, yeah, I probably shouldn't quit the game and I'll send Kimmy home. This scenario was so complicated that Jeff felt that it was necessary to pull out a poster board and break down exactly what happened to the live audience. Something that's interesting that could have happened here is that if the votes split 3 ways between Kimmy, Tasha, and Keith, and if it deadlocked, everyone in that scenario would have been immune. That's something that we don't have an answer to, though. We don't know what would happen in that tiebreaker. We found out in a similar situation in Survivor Winners at War that if the only 2 people not immune are in a deadlock tie, they go to a fire-making challenge. This did not end up coming to fruition as the tribe did not go to a tie vote there, but it gave us some useful information to figure out other scenarios that would be unknown until very recently. There is no precedent, however, for a 3-person deadlock. It's likely that they would just do a fire-making challenge and have the person that didn't finish it go home, but until it happens, we'll just have to wait and see. So if idols can create a lot of chaos, then it would stand to reason that things like extra votes could also cause some issues of their own. This advantage is a lot less common than idols, so there are not very many opportunities to see it get used. Due to this, we've only seen the extra vote used twice in a tie situation, the first of those being in Ghost Island. At the final 10, the tribe demerged and sent 2 groups to Tribal Council. On one tribe, we had Michael, Kellen, Dominic, Laurel, and Wendell. Michael was the primary target for the group, and he knew that he might be in danger, so he told Kellen that he had an idol to try to get her not to vote for him. This made Kellen very weary, as if he had an idol, he could send someone home with 1 vote, and that person could very well be her. So she went to Wendell and said, "Hey Wendell, we might want to put some votes on Laurel if Michael has an idol." Wendell took that information and said, "Hey Laurel, we might want to put some votes on Kellen in case Michael has an idol." This effectively got Kellen and Laurel to vote for each other, while Wendell and Dominic could put their 2 votes onto Michael. This would seem to be a good plan, but it opened the door to a lot of crazy scenarios. So when Wendell and Dominic started whispering to each other in the middle of Tribal Council, Kellen was noticeably freaked out and decided to whip out her extra vote and use both votes on Laurel. So when Michael did not have an idol, the vote tied. 2 votes on Michael, 2 votes on Laurel, 1 vote on Kellen, and 1 vote on Wendell. So naturally there was a revote, and they all agreed to vote at Michael with a 3-0 decision. So it would seem that the extra vote did not carry into the revote, right? Well, that's not exactly the case. Earlier in the season, Kellen read out the rules to the extra vote, and it said that the extra vote carries into the ties revote. So then what happened here? Well, Kellen forgot about this rule apparently, and the producers did not remind her that she actually could vote twice, likely because it didn't matter since she wanted to vote out Michael. But while the votes would not tell you it, she actually could have forced a deadlock with her 2 votes, which would have been very interesting to see. In season 41, we found out that they actually changed the rule to make it so you had to use your extra vote in the revote. This was likely done to avoid any confusion about the rules. So that's how extra votes work with ties, but what about vote steals? For the uninitiated, unlike an extra vote, a vote steal takes away the vote of another tribe mate, and the advantage holder essentially gets to vote for them. As this advantage is even more rare than the extra vote, we have not seen the mechanics of it in action when it comes to being in a tie. We do know, however, how it would work in a tie, as the first holder of the vote steal, Stephen Fishback, shed some light on this on Twitter. Since you are essentially taking the vote from the other person and voting for them, if they can't vote, you also can't vote for them. So if they're involved in the tie, that's no good. Now, if they're not involved in the tie, it's free reign. You can vote for whoever you want. This means that you have to be extra careful who you steal your vote from.
That person won't be voting at Tribal Council, I guess, for the first time in Survivor history, and I will be voting for them instead.
And whose vote are you going to steal?
I'm going to steal Joe's vote.
11th person voted out, and the 5th member of our jury.
Wow, nice. Great job, guys. Great blindside. That was awesome.
All right, you got all of that. Now let's ask another question. What happens if somebody does not have a vote at Tribal, but they're also in a deadlock tie? Do they get a say in who goes home? Do they still have to draw rocks? To answer this, I'm going to have to talk about the 3rd episode of the most recent season, Survivor 42. So if you're not caught up, you can join me again at the timestamp on the screen to talk about what happens if the vote ties at Final Tribal Council. Yes, you heard me, Final Tribal Council. Okay, everybody ready? So, in episode 3 of season 42, we see one of the most bizarre situations in Survivor. In the previous episode, Mike found the Beware advantage, so he lost his vote until all of the idols got activated. This alone would mean that on a tribe of 6 there are 5 total votes. While not impossible, it would be very convoluted to get a deadlock here. And honestly, what actually happens is even crazier. So Chanelle goes on a trip with Omar after the challenge. They have a little powwow, and Chanelle knows that she's going to Tribal Council, so she tells Omar, "Bro, I can't lose my vote. I gotta keep it." Omar takes that and says, "Great, Chanelle has to keep her vote. I can risk my vote for the extra vote, and everything will be Gucci." Chanelle then, on the other side of the island, says, I know I told Omar that I needed my vote, but I'm playing Survivor, so I'm gonna risk it all for the money, baby." And she risks her vote too. So does Chanelle tell her allies that she risked her vote? Well, yes and no. She tells Daniel that she might not have a vote, but everyone else is left in the dark.
It's either Lydia or Jenny. Comes down to us.
We gotta take out Lydia. We have to convince them to split the vote.
Split the vote?
I think I don't have a vote.
Oh no.
So she comes up with an extremely convoluted plan to get a 2-1-1 vote, which would be incredibly difficult to pull off. They would need to completely sell to Lydia and Hai that they should split their votes, and Chanelle does a really bad job of convincing them of this. This then causes Hai and Lydia to vote together for Jenny, and when lo and behold, Chanelle does not have a vote, the votes become tied 2-2 and then 1-1. Hai's reaction to this is hysterical.
Deadlocked. What's wrong, Hai?
Where are the votes?
Let me get to it.
So Jeff explains that only Hai and Daniel can decide on who goes home, since the other people either don't have a vote or are being voted for. This does not, however, mean that they are the only ones that would draw rocks, as all 4 of the people not getting the votes still draw rocks here. This leads to one of the messiest deliberations on the show, where eventually Daniel agrees with Hai to vote out Jenny. This means that an alliance of 2 ended up voting out one of an alliance of 4 without any advantages or idols of their own. Time will only tell what craziness will happen with tie votes in the future, but with this piece of the puzzle, it would seem almost every rule is finally out in the open. Well, until they release some new wacky advantage. So now that I've gone over all of the rules we know for the regular game, what about Final Tribal Council? You would think that there wouldn't be a chance for it to happen, because any tiebreaker would be really dissatisfying at a Final Tribal Council. And you would be right, for the most part at least. In every season with the final 2, the jury is an odd number, ensuring that a tie would be impossible. Except for one season. Inexplicably, in Survivor Micronesia, there was 8 people in the jury, and there was a final 2. Even more baffling was that it was a surprise final 2, as the cast was under the impression that considering for the past few seasons the format of the show had changed to being a final 3, the final 2 was a relic of the past. But the Survivor producers, being as tricky as they are, decided to make it a final 2. They just forgot to make the jury around earlier. Jeff has gone on record and said that if there was a tie, there was some sort of a tiebreaker, but that remains unknown. This decision was so bizarre that there are literal conspiracy theories about it, with people claiming that the game was rigged against Cirie because they changed it to a final 2 out of nowhere. This is obviously not the case, but it's funny that the decision was baffling enough that people thought that the fix was in. So what about a final 3? Tie votes can happen there, right? So what happens then? Well, we know a few things. Jeff has confirmed to us that if 2 people are tied, but the third person also has some votes, there will be a revote, and all of the people that voted for the third person will have to consolidate their votes into one of the two people that were involved in the tie. If there is then another tie, the final three provides a failsafe within it. Jeff addressed this in the Game Changers finale, where he explained that the third person, in this case Troyzan, would be the person that would decide the final vote. A few seasons later, we would finally see the first tie vote at Final Tribal Council between old friends Dominic and Wendell, who made it to the final two and each received 5 votes at the Final Tribal Council.
For the first time in 36 seasons of Survivor, we have a tie.
And no, Troyzan did not get the deciding vote here. In this case, the third person was Laurel, and she broke the tie for Wendell, though there is one potential issue with the final 3. What if all final 3 contestants received the same amount of votes, and then after the revote continued to have the same amount of votes? Well, I have no idea, and this has actually been possible 8 times in the past. I guess the producers just figured, hey, that would never happen, and if it does, well, they could do island trivia or something. So, this has been all of the rules about tie votes. Let me know what you've learned in the comments below. If you were one of those super nerds that knew every single thing about this, tell me about it. Tell me how stupid I am. I don't know. I've been Alex. Let's keep it real.
That right there is the mail. Now let's talk about the mail. Can we talk about the mail, please, Mac? I'm dying to talk about the mail with you all day, okay? Pepe Sylvia. This name keeps coming up over and over again. Every day, Pepe's mail's getting sent back to me. Pepe Sylvia, Pepe Sylvia. I look in the mail. Well, this whole box is Pepe Sylvia. So I say to myself, I gotta find this guy. I gotta go up to his office. I gotta put his mail in the guy's goddamn hands. Otherwise, he's never gonna get it. It's gonna keep coming back down here.